The wind howled through the trees, carrying the salty scent of the ocean as Emma walked along the rocky shoreline. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, but her mind was elsewhere. It had been a long day at the cafe, where she worked, and all she wanted was a moment of peace. The sound of waves crashing against the shore had always calmed her, and she was hoping it would do the same now. Then she heard it, a desperate, panicked barking. Emma stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. She scanned the water, squinting. Against the sunlight reflecting off the waves, there, caught in the rough current, was a dog. It struggled to stay afloat, its paws paddling frantically, but the tide was pulling it farther out. The barks turned into whimpers, weak and pleading. Without thinking, Emma kicked off her shoes and ran toward the water. The icy waves hit her like a shock, but she pushed forward, diving into the churning sea. The dog was drifting fast, and every muscle in her body screamed as she swam against the current. "Hold on," she called, even though she knew the dog wouldn't understand. But maybe, just maybe, it would know she was trying to help. With a final burst of energy, Emma reached out and wrapped her arms around the exhausted animal. It was a golden retriever, its fur soaked and heavy. The dog clung to her, its breathing ragged as she fought her way back to shore. Every wave threatened to drag them both under, but Emma refused to let go. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her feet touched the rocky bottom. She staggered onto the shore, gasping for air, and gently laid the dog down on the damp sand. It coughed and shivered, but its eyes flickered open, locking onto hers with something that felt like gratitude. Emma sat back, dripping and exhausted, as relief washed over her. She had saved it, but before she could fully catch her breath, the sound of tires crunching against gravel made her look up. A sleek black car had pulled up near the cliffs, its tinted windows giving nothing away. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in an expensive-looking coat, and moved with an air of quiet authority. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, landed on the dog first, then on Emma. "You saved him." His voice was deep, controlled. Emma nodded, still breathless. He was drowning. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the waves behind them. Then, almost as if he had just remembered something, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leash. "This dog." His fingers tightened around the leather strap. "He belongs to me." Emma blinked, taking in the man's expensive clothes, the car, the way he carried himself. There was something about him, something distant, as if he existed in a world far from hers. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her, his expression unreadable. She had expected relief, or even gratitude, but instead, there was something else in his eyes. A guarded look, a hesitation. Emma swallowed. "You're his owner." This man nodded, then crouched down, running a hand over the dog's damp fur. The golden retriever wagged its tail weakly, pressing its nose against his palm. A flicker of emotion crossed the man's face. Something soft, something real. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. "Thank you," he said finally, "for saving him." Emma studied him, trying to piece together who he was. The car, the tailored coat, the way he spoke, polite but distant. And then recognition hit her. This wasn't just any man. This was Nathaniel Grayson, a billionaire, a recluse, a man whispered about in the news, but rarely seen in public. And now, here he was, standing before her, looking at her as if she had just done something he couldn't quite understand. Emma's pulse quickened. Why had his dog been out here alone? And why did he seem uneasy? Something about this didn't feel right. Before she could ask, "Nathaniel, reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. "Take this." He extended it toward her. Emma hesitated. "What is it?" "Payment." His voice was firm. "For saving him." Her stomach twisted. Payment. Was that how he saw this? A transaction? Emma looked from the envelope to the dog, who was now resting against Nathaniel's leg, then back up at the man himself. Everything about this moment felt off, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something much bigger than she ever intended. Emma stared at the envelope in Nathaniel Grayson's outstretched hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, making her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't what she had expected. A simple "thank you" would have been enough. Instead, he was offering her money, as if saving a life, even a dog's, could be reduced to a business deal. "I don't want your money," she said, pushing the envelope back toward him. Nathaniel's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, annoyance. He didn't argue, though. Instead, he slipped the envelope back into his coat and turned his attention to the golden retriever, running, a hand along its wet fur. Emma folded her arms, watching him. The way he knelt beside the dog, the way his fingers hesitated before stroking its ears, told her more than his words ever could. He cared, deeply, but there was a strange distance in him, as if he wasn't used to showing it. "Does he have a name?" she asked. Nathaniel hesitated, then said, "Atlas." The dog's ears perked up slightly at the sound of his name, and Emma couldn't help but smile. "That's a strong name." Nathaniel didn't respond. Instead, he stood, brushing off his coat. "I should take him home." Emma nodded, expecting that to be the end of it. But as she turned to walk away, she felt his gaze still on her. "You're not going to ask?" he said suddenly. She glanced back. "Ask what?" "Who I am." Emma let out a small breath. "I already know who you are." Something passed between them in the silence that followed. The billionaire who rarely showed his face in public. The man surrounded by rumors of wealth, of power, of a life spent behind locked doors. And yet, he had come here himself for his dog. "That doesn't mean I know you," she added. Nathaniel's jaw tensed, as if her words had hit a nerve. But instead of responding, he gave a curt nod, then turned toward his car. Atlas followed him, though he glanced back at Emma, his tail wagging slightly, and just like that, they were gone. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, Emma was back at the cafe, trying to push the whole encounter out of her mind. She had lattes to make, orders to take, and customers who had no idea she had pulled a drowning dog from the ocean less than 24 hours ago. But her mind kept wandering back to Nathaniel. Why had Atlas been out there alone? Why had Nathaniel seemed so wary? The bell above the cafe door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up, then froze. Nathaniel Grayson stood in the doorway. He was out of place here. The cafe was warm and lived in, filled with locals who lingered over their coffee, talking about their days. Nathaniel, in his perfectly tailored coat and guarded expression, looked like he had just stepped out of another world. Every conversation in the cafe quieted. People were noticing him now, whispering, but he ignored them. His eyes found Emma's, and he walked straight toward the counter. "I need to talk to you," he said. Emma wiped her hands on her apron. "About what?" Nathaniel glanced around, as if measuring the number of people listening. His voice dropped. "Atlas." Her stomach tightened. "Is he okay?" Nathaniel hesitated. "I don't know." Something about the way he said it sent a chill through her. She untied her apron. "Give me a second." She told her co-worker she'd be back soon, then led Nathaniel outside. The morning air was crisp, the scent of coffee and salt in the wind. "What's going on?" she asked. Nathaniel's hands were shoved into his coat pockets. He wasn't meeting her eyes now. Atlas has been acting strange since yesterday. Restless. He keeps going to the door, whining, like he wants to go back. Emma frowned. Maybe. He's still shaken up. He almost drowned. Nathaniel exhaled, his breath visible in the cold. I thought that too. But then I checked the security footage. Emma blinked. Security footage? My estate has cameras everywhere. I wanted to know how Atlas got out. Emma could hear the tension in his voice now. And Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Someone let him out. The words settled between them, heavy and unsettling. Emma shivered, but not from the cold. Are you saying someone wanted him gone? Nathaniel said quietly. Emma's pulse quickened. She had thought yesterday was just a strange encounter, saving a dog, meeting a billionaire. But now it was something else entirely. Why would someone do that? She asked. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. When he finally looked at her, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Fear. I don't know, he admitted. But I need to find out. A beat of silence passed before he said the last thing Emma expected. And I need your help. She stared at him, caught between the safety of her ordinary life and the pull of something unknown. Something told her that once she stepped into Nathaniel Grayson's world, there would be no turning back. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she processed Nathaniel's words. He needed her help. It didn't make sense. She was just a barista who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. What could she possibly do? And yet, as she looked into Nathaniel's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. This man, with all his wealth and power, was genuinely afraid. Emma swallowed. What exactly do you need me to do? Nathaniel hesitated, as if he wasn't used to asking for anything. Atlas trusts you. If he keeps trying to go back, maybe he's trying to tell us something. He paused. I don't trust many people, but yesterday, you didn't take the money. That tells me something about you. Emma's heart pounded. She had no reason to get involved. This wasn't her problem. But the memory of Atlas, struggling in the water, flashed through her mind. The panic in his eyes. The desperate fight to survive. Something was wrong, and she couldn't ignore it. Okay, she said. I'll help. Nathaniel exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath. Come with me. Nathaniel's estate sat on the cliffs, overlooking the ocean like something out of a dream. Massive, but eerily quiet. As they walked through the sprawling property, Emma noticed the security cameras tucked into the corners, the tall iron gates surrounding the perimeter. This place is locked down like a fortress, she murmured. Nathaniel gave a humorless smile. And yet, someone got in. Inside, Atlas perked up the moment he saw Emma. His tail wagged, and he padded over, pressing his nose against her hand. Nathaniel watched carefully. He hasn't been this calm all day. Emma knelt beside Atlas, scratching behind his ears. Show us, she said softly. Where do you want to go? Atlas turned toward the back door and whined. Nathaniel and Emma exchanged a look. Moments later, they were following the dog through the estate's vast backyard. The night air was cool, the waves crashing in the distance. Atlas led them toward the side gate. Unlocked, Nathaniel stiffened. It shouldn't be open. A chill ran down Emma's spine. Someone had been here. Atlas whined again, pawing at the ground near the bushes. Nathaniel bent down, brushing the leaves aside. His fingers froze as they touched something cold. A small, black device. A tracker. Emma's stomach dropped. Someone was tracking him. Nathaniel's face darkened. He stood abruptly, scanning the area. That means they could be watching now. The words had barely left his mouth when a rustling sound came from the trees. Emma's pulse spiked. Nathaniel! But he had already moved. In a blur, he grabbed her wrist, pulling her behind him as a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, in dark clothing, a hood covering his face. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice steady but cold. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and bolted toward the trees. Nathaniel took off after him. Emma's heart pounded as she watched them disappear into the darkness. Atlas barked, pacing anxiously. For a few agonizing moments, there was nothing but silence. Then the sound of a struggle, a sharp grunt, a rustling of leaves. Then Nathaniel emerged, dragging the man by the collar. Emma exhaled. What now? Nathaniel yanked the hood back, revealing a sharp-featured man with a cut on his cheek. His eyes darted around, calculating. "Who sent you?" Nathaniel repeated. The man smirked. "You already know." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Emma looked. Between them, confused. "What is he talking about?" she asked. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My family." Emma frowned. "Your family did this." Nathaniel's gaze was distant. "Not all of them, just one." He exhaled sharply. "My brother." Emma's mind spun. Nathaniel's brother. Why would his own family set this up? Nathaniel tightened his grip on the man's collar. "Tell her why." The man's smirk faded. He hesitated, then finally muttered, "They wanted the dog gone." Because of what he found. Emma's blood went cold. What did Atlas find?" Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Something my brother didn't want anyone to see." A silence stretched between them. Then Nathaniel reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. With a few quick taps, he pulled up a security clip. He turned the screen toward Emma. The grainy footage showed Atlas in the backyard a few nights ago, sniffing near the garden. Then he started digging. And buried beneath the dirt, a flash of metal. A safe. Emma's breath caught. "What's in it?" Nathaniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Evidence. Something that could ruin my brother." Emma stared at him. "So he tried to get rid of Atlas before he could lead anyone to it." Nathaniel nodded. "And now we know where to look." The safe was exactly where the footage showed it to be. Buried beneath the garden, rusted but still intact. It took both of them to haul it out, their hands covered in dirt. Nathaniel worked quickly, cracking the lock with practiced ease. When the door creaked open, the truth spilled out, stacks of documents, photographs, transactions that shouldn't exist. Emma didn't know the full scope, but she knew one thing: Nathaniel's brother had done something bad, and now Nathaniel had the proof. He looked at Emma, something like relief in his eyes. "This changes everything." Emma exhaled. The weight of the night pressed down on her, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. The mystery was unraveling. The truth was coming out. Atlas, sitting beside them, wagged his tail as if sensing that things were finally right. Nathaniel turned to Emma, his expression softer than before. "I couldn't have done this without you." Emma smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Well, you owe me a coffee." Nathaniel chuckled, a rare sound from him. "I think I can manage that." As the sun began to rise over the cliffs, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, Emma realized something. She had stepped into Nathaniel Grayson's world by accident, but maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to leave it just yet.